And this is the moment when beachgoers in Israel witnessed a Hezbollah rocket near the coastal city of Nahariya. Israel says 2 rockets targeted the Safed area, with one striking an open location and the other being intercepted. Separate attacks were also reported in western Galilee. After nearly 2 hours of high-level talks in Washington on Friday, Donald Trump has yet to announce a decision on a deal with Iran. The U.S. president left the White House Situation Room without delivering his final determination that he'd promised. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has warned that Washington is ready to resume strikes against Tehran if these negotiations collapse.
They can either do this now through a deal, and we think we're in a good place to make that deal, or they can deal with the War Department. And we are prepared. We're postured even stronger today than we were on day one to address it that way if we have to, but he'd prefer not to. So Iran knows very, very clearly what our expectations are, and that's on the negotiating team to deliver. They're coming in our direction. The talks have been productive. I think they know where it needs to go, and I'm quite confident with our president, who makes nothing but great deals.
And Heidi Jo Castro is in Washington, D.C. with the latest on Trump's meeting.
As you mentioned, he met with his advisors at the White House in the Situation Room, no less, which is the room where the president tends to make the biggest wartime decisions. And he was there and then he left. And there's still really no word on why he did not make a decision on this framework for potentially extending the ceasefire. This was after reporting on Thursday that the U.S. and Iran were nearing a memorandum of understanding that just lacked Trump's sign-off, which would indeed extend the ceasefire, reopen the Strait of Hormuz potentially, and then have an agreement that both sides would then at that point start to talk about how to solve the nuclear issue between them. Well, none of that has happened thus far. We did hear from Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense for the U.S., who was in Singapore. He said that he was confident a deal would be reached, but he emphasized that the U.S. naval blockade of Hormuz in the meantime remains in place. And as we heard, he said the U.S. is still ready to resume strikes and that its military posture in the region remains stronger than ever.
Now, Iran's foreign ministry says no agreement has been reached with the U.S. Rizal Sardar has more from Tehran.
The Iranians, for now, despite the statements coming from President Trump, they're saying that, well, the agreement is not finalized and they're still working on it. So the diplomacy is ongoing. The messages, the proposals are still being exchanged through the Pakistani mediators and some other regional actors. However, still there are sticking points, according to the Iranian officials. So the first one is Iranian frozen assets. So Iranians are saying once the deal is announced, its frozen assets must immediately be returned to Iran, while Americans are saying that the return of the frozen assets must be on performance base and gradual. So this is one of the sticking points. And the second sticking point is the reconstruction funds. So Iranians, once they started the negotiations, they were asking for a compensation. However, then they changed the terminology, and now they're calling it a reconstruction fund, and it's about $300 billion. So far, Americans have not shown any commitment to this. This is another point of this agreement. And then it is Iranians are saying that while we are negotiating, there must be a lifting of the sanctions, at least on Iran's oil and petrochemical sectors, and Iran must be able to sell its oil and petrochemicals. But so far, Americans have not been keen to show any commitment to that as well. So these are the main sticking points now, and Iranians are saying that once these are finalized and there is a consensus on that, so there will be an announcement of an agreement simultaneously by both sides.
And joining me now from New York is Marco Vicenzino, a geopolitical risk specialist. Marco, you've argued that the conflict over the Strait of Hormuz and Iran setting up the Persian Gulf Strait Authority, well, that's going to rewrite the commercial order of this shipping lane, with stability and confidence becoming more politically negotiated under pressure and less as the result of an automatic equilibrium. In what way?
Basically, we're shifting from a state of closure to a state of, I would say, conditional access. What I mean by that, the hope of everyone all along is that there'll be a deal and then safe passage and commerce will return to normal. The reality of the way I see it is that we're not going to have a return to normal. There's not going to be safe, predictable routes. It's going to become far more conditioned. I mean, access and the conditioning of access is going to be far more politicized in the Strait of Hormuz. And then in addition, I think, the idea is you cannot separate geopolitical realities from the ordinary, normal trade of the past. So in other words, we may have a deal, okay, but the deal is going to be something temporary. You have de-escalation, but in reality is you don't have normalization. And I think throughout this process, so you look in short term, okay, relief in certain ways, you can calm markets, but in the longer term, the bottom line is you're not going to restore that long-term confidence. All you have along is crisis management, but not crisis resolution. And so I think, once again, temporary calm, it's important not to mistake that for what you call strategic stability.
But Marco, isn't the conditions of freedom of navigation actually defined in that UN Convention of the Law of the Sea UNCLOS?
It all depends upon the geopolitical circumstances. What you just said was pointed out was in a different political era in which there was that, once again, everyone took for granted that there was safe passage. You would never disrupt choke points. The red line, there were certain red lines. You wouldn't, and so basically what happened in recent weeks is once the Strait of Hormuz, once you begin that blockade and that closure, that's a red line that you set a precedent for other parts around the world, not just for the Strait of Hormuz, but you're also talking the Strait of Malacca, which connects East Asia with the Middle East and European trade. You have, the Bab el-Mandeb that connects the Red Sea, and that connects Europe to the Middle East and East Asia. You have these certain critical choke points. So what happened in Hormuz is basically it's part of a global transformation. And I think part of that global transformation is that ending of that, what you refer to as that safe passage, what people took for granted. Now we're living in an era which globalization has not ended, but it's taking on a far more geopolitical dimension, whereby the lines of supply are being supply chains are being politicized. So you wouldn't say end of globalization. I would call it reglobalization. That's the reconfiguration of global supply chains according to geopolitical fault lines.
But what you're arguing here, I mean, this, of course, leaves a lot of uncertainty, and those conditions are going to depend on the outcome of the political pressure at the time, leaving countries exposed to actions of others, and, of course, the possibility that those conditions can also change over time. So, for example, the Gulf nations, what will the effects of this new commercial order be?
What you just referred to, everything you just said, that's what you call the new normal. The old normal is gone. You're going to have a normal state you call managed instability, a more permanent state of uncertainty, and that complicates things, not just for sovereigns, nation states, but also for companies. They're going to have to price in this new instability. Once the Hormuz, that red line was crossed that I referred to, that opened the floodgates to everything that you just referred to, the new normal. We can no longer take the old normal things we took for granted. The new normal is going to be that consistent state, a protracted state of what you call of managed instability, whereby you have issues like coercion and intimidation as real factors in determining global trade. So the road ahead is a very unclear one, a continued uncertainty, and it's I think not just sovereigns, companies and individuals are going to have to be prepared for this and price this in. And that's going to also lead for ordinary consumers higher prices as time goes by.
I guess this argument also is valid for, well, we talked about the Gulf countries, I guess China as well, which of course relies so heavily on the fact that it has confidence that it will get hold of those products being transported through the Strait of Hormuz.
On a conditional basis, not on a certain basis. And as that uncertainty will lead to prices staying higher than usual. Hormuz is a global issue. It's not a regional issue. It hits everyone, countries, it hits consumers, it hits ordinary citizens. at all levels. So once again, that predictability element that far long was taken for granted, in my opinion, is gone for at least for the foreseeable future. But that's something, that new normal is something that commerce, sovereigns, and ordinary citizens need to be prepared for. We have a state of crisis management, not one of crisis resolution.
But if we accept this, if we take this as an outcome that is acceptable, could the same argument be made about the influence of geopolitics over, for example, the Bosphorus, Turkey taking control of the Bosphorus, or Spain starting to charge a toll for entry into the Mediterranean?
Yeah, that's, once again, I'm referring, everything you just point at are examples of that new normal I'm speaking to. Everyone is exposed. The red lines were crossed in Hormuz. That set a precedent, and it leads to the uncertainty and everything else. All of them. The ones I would really refer to more is probably the Malacca Straits, Strait of Taiwan, Taiwan Strait. You also have once Bab el-Mandeb, with obviously Suez is pretty much, it's Suez going down to the Red Sea, but Bab el-Mandeb, that's going to remain subject and politically exposed. What you refer to as in terms of Turkey, yes, that's access between the Black Sea, but obviously that's involved Russian trade going through. Treaties were signed decades ago about maintaining that, the Bosphorus to maintain secure. Obviously, geopolitics can be played, but in terms of the players involved, that's Europe, Russia, Black Sea. It becomes far more complicated for Turkey. When you're talking about Spain, you're talking about Gibraltar, Morocco, and Spain, there's a fair amount of instability there. That doesn't mean that in the foreseeable future. The point I'm making is that countries and companies need to be prepared, because the new realities, these are new geopolitical realities that we have to deal with. Some places are are less secure than others, and some are more secure. It all depends. It's not a black and white. We're not living in the black and white whereby people can take things for granted. It's a far more complicated state. We're living in a deep gray zone, and that's the new realities that the world needs to be prepared. It's not what one would like for, one would hope for, what should be. It is the reality at the present time. It's what is. And if you're a corporate or you're a sovereign or you're ordinary citizens, that's the reality you have to deal with.
Marco Vicenzino, a geopolitical risk analyst, joining us live from New York. Thank you so much for your time, Marco.